All right, let's get started with the next session. Dr. Renu Swarup is on the way, but it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Simon Kay. Simon is the head of the international partnerships and whatever at Wellcome. Simon and I share a lot of we share a lot of jokes, but beyond that, we share two common things that we like: books and masala dosa. So, with that introduction, Simon, the floor is yours.
So Shahid, God forbid that I ever stand up and talk about your job is the India Alliance and whatever. So first of all, I am going to do the usual sort of formalities because I think it's really important on behalf of the Wellcome Trust. It's only once a year that we really get the chance to meet with all of you. So, first of all, it's a really sincere thanks to I do actually want to start by saying the DBT, and it's really a shame that the Secretary of DBT is delayed, but I hope you'll convey that my thanks on behalf of Wellcome to the Secretary of DBT and all her staff, because they did work incredibly hard to enable us to have moved into a third, do we call it a second or a third phase? I'm not sure. A second phase. So really on behalf of Wellcome, there is a huge appreciation to the long-term partnership we have with DBT, and it's incredibly unusual to have this, what was a 1-to-1 funding ratio, now a 1-to-2 funding ratio. If that could be repeated in other countries, it will be wonderful. So if there is anyone here from DBT, we appreciate you and your partnership. The second thing is, I really do want to appreciate the work of, with the exception of the Executive Director, the work of the India Alliance and all the staff, of course, who are so ably led by Shahid. So thank you to all of the staff at the India Alliance. We know how hard you work to pull together both the committees and this fellows meeting, and also to say that all the work you did for the 10th anniversary celebrations, which comes round, I guess, only every 10 years, but also how smart you were in preparing for this week to send your boss to a different time zone. So congratulations for that planning, but thanks to all of you. And then thirdly, to the committee members. I know that there's new committee members here. There's some of you who've been around a long time, but it's such an important part of the high quality of the India Alliance, of the dedication and the amount of time and reading and work that you all do behind the scenes. So thank you. And then also I just want to recognize, I'm always so pleased to see our colleagues from Delta and Africa. Would you stand up if you are in the room? And I'll clearly embarrass them if they're not here. Good, yeah. So I do hope you get a chance to meet all of them. The other thing I just wanted to mention before I get into the reason I was asked to speak was just two things. Sarah knows that every year I sort of think that every year the talks are getting better, and certainly the three I sat through this morning I thought were great, and I thought you really did set your work in context and why it's important. So thank you to those speakers this morning. And the other thing is a micro detail, but really important. And I was just mentioning to Shahid before that it's only a small thing, but I think if every meeting that all of us went to served water in glass bottles and not plastic bottles, it may sound like a tiny thing, but I really applaud the India Alliance and the hotel here for organising it. And I think all of us should make a point that when we go to meetings, ask people not to serve us water in plastic bottles. So I really applaud the India Alliance for that. And for anyone here who knows how to tweet, I think we should be tweeting that. So I don't know, I've probably used up half my time already. How am I doing? So I was asked to speak actually about what Wellcome wants from the India Alliance. And I think the word even expectation sounds loaded, but I think what I would say is that people will often ask, why does a fund? And it's actually really important that we can explain to ourselves at Wellcome why we fund, and actually that we can explain to the people we fund why we fund. And it's really quite recent for Wellcome that we've introduced something called, it's called a success framework. But these things require an awful lot of work, determining what is your ultimate goal, what are the outcomes you work to, and what are the steps to get there. So with the help of my colleagues, I have put together a framework, and I also want to just make a little health warning that it may or may not be different to the work that Vishy and Shahid and the team have done. It should overlap, but it is a description of what it looks like from Wellcome. And it's such a shame that Renu's not here, because it would also be very nice to see how it overlaps with DBT's expectations. Obviously, as partners, you hope it's similar. So, and try not to pick it apart, because every time I look at it, and I talk to my colleague Irini, who's here somewhere, and even, where's Irini? Even last night was making changes for me. There's always things that you've missed out on these things, so do feel free to comment. That looks like a lot of words, which I'm going to come down actually. So you can read through that quickly, but there's in any success framework, there's a set of activities that you can describe, but that's really the inputs. You can have a quick look at that, but I want to sort of move on to output. So if you stand back a little bit from India Alliance, what we look for over the longer term is that across India there's a cohort of, I don't need to read it, but, essentially biomedical and clinical researchers. And I put that at an output level because it doesn't underestimate how much work that is, but even that doesn't really answer the question why. I've also included here that research management systems are strengthened. I'll say a bit more about that, and we'll hear more about that tomorrow from Savita Iyer. Clinical research programs are established. Some of you will know that that's a new program under this new phase. And I've also put a phrase which we use from time to time, is that I think together with India Alliance and DBT, one hopes that the India Alliance funding scheme has, if you like, a positive impact and a ripple effect on other funding schemes. So it's probably more interesting to move to the outcome level. So at the top, and you don't necessarily have to read this from the top, but we've said that, and what I've done is here, I've drawn on outcomes that have been described within Wellcome success framework. And I think some of these will probably be obvious to you. But what you can't escape from is that Wellcome provides its £1 billion a year of funding. Yeah, I didn't make a mistake there, it's $1 billion. I still get used to it. The understanding of health in India Alliance has improved. And my own insight there, as Shahid just has mentioned, is that if you eat too many doses, you get bigger. So that's, that's probably my one sort of insight into health in India. But it's, that's, I think, probably why many of you do it. I'm sure many of you are doing it for basic discovery, but I hope that for most of you, there's some kind of link to wanting to understand health. That discoveries are translated. Not all of you will do that, but you'll find that with more and more funders are getting more and more interested actually in how discovery is translated. And I know that also creates dilemmas about whether the emphasis is on translation or basic science. And I think I'd stand back from that and say, Wellcome still, is absolutely committed to the funding of basic discovery science. And I think what I'd also say is I personally think you don't get the innovation or the innovative science if you don't have a significant cadre of talented researchers. Research relevance and impact is advanced by public engagement. I think if you went back a few years, and I hope that Sarah would agree with this, that it could have been seen as an add-on to a grant. Certainly the way Wellcome is now looking at public engagement and policy engagement, it's absolutely crucial. I see with more and more of my science colleagues at Wellcome that they're more and more commissioning their own research to figure out what do the public, for example, think of neuroscience research. One of our colleagues was here earlier this week who's going to join the trustees. He leads our neuroscience work, and he is actually commissioning his own research, working with Wellcome Public Engagement, to really try and establish if there's clear understanding and link between the work we fund in neuroscience and what the public think we should be funding and what's important. So I can't stress enough actually how important it is. And in some ways it's not that difficult. I'll use the B word, Brexit, but if you go back 2 years, there's a huge now criticism, and I'm sure some of my colleagues here from the UK will recognize the criticism of elites. And I think that those of us who work at places like Wellcome and academia would recognize the criticism of elites. You may not agree with it, but it just demonstrates a very, very big gap now between, for example, research and the public. So Wellcome's taken a very hard look at itself and the way it funds and who it connects with. So if you look at the Wellcome collection, which is effectively our museum, it's not hard to predict which strata of society or the public come into it. So we have to think about more novel ways of engaging with the public and listening in a different way. So I hope that Sarah would agree, and I'm sure you'll get a chance to talk about this, that so we really do want to see you finding ways of embedding engagement into the research you do. And I've also put here about sustainable funding, that we think that healthy organizations have a diversity of funding, and over the long term, over the very long term, we hope that your funding sources would diversify, and I'm sure you would see that as a sensible strategy. And then the final thing, of course, is that if all of this is successful, and I'm sure you've got examples, health challenges are dealt with and addressed. So that's a very quick look through. Just I want to say a little bit more about research management, but tomorrow you'll hear from Savita. From a Wellcome perspective, we've put quite an emphasis on encouraging a strengthening of research management within institutions, and again, the Indra Alliance, and supported by Savita, is, and I hope I'm right, you're embedding a program within the next 5 years, and we're doing exactly the same with our programs in Africa. And I think this is a very challenging thing to do, but I think in the long term, I think we would judge that researchers spending less time doing administration and more time doing the research, having more help with leveraging and winning grants, I hope that you would see it as a good thing. And the reason I'm mentioning it now is that I don't think this can just be the work of the people who will promote research management. I think it needs a mutuality where people like yourselves, who've probably seen research management in other countries, are also creating a demand and a pull for better research management. And I'll also make here a link to research leadership. In the session we're running tomorrow afternoon, you'll hear from an Indian group called INCLEN, who've been doing some work and research on the if you like, the path to leadership in an Indian context. How long have I got? The thing is, she wants me to keep talking until the next guest host. So I could tell a few jokes, or Shahid's better at that. So let me just say a few things about what's important at Wellcome right now, some of our new priorities. We've got a new fund that's being launched called the LEAP Fund. And so this is, I think, Wellcome at its most probably audacious. So we're actually setting up a separate company that will enable that company to fund in different innovative ways. And particularly it'll enable cross and multidisciplinary funding. And they've taken some inspiration from some funding models in the US. And they're currently looking for a new chief executive. So any of you are interested, look out for the LEAP Fund. Mental health has now been approved as a new priority area at Wellcome. It has £200 million attached to it. It's being led by someone who's just joined Wellcome called Miranda Woolpert, who comes with a phenomenal track record. So that is just beginning. So keep a lookout for mental health at Wellcome. There's been such a good campaign that you probably have not failed to notice that we have a new initiative looking at the very neglected area of snake bites. And some of you will know Mike Turner. Many of you will know Mike Turner. Well, Mike actually has been instrumental in leading the development of the snake bite priority area over the last 2 years. That's now been approved, so they're now moving into the implementation. So any of you worried about snake bites, keep an eye out for that program. We've had a program in Planetary Health, which has been in development for a year or two now, and that would look at the intersections between human health, the impacts of climate change on health, nutrition, sustainable cities, etc. And that, I hope, will be approved at the end of this year. So it's another big source of leadership and funding that come from Wellcome. Open access continues to be a big thing, and you'll know that Wellcome is signed up to Plan S. And then I think the final thing to mention, and I'm going to make a guess that maybe this is where Indra Alliance will be in 5 years now, is that Jeremy, our director, and many of you will have seen or met Jeremy, and he spoke at the 10th anniversary party. Jeremy can never stand still. So right now, his big focus is on the Ebola outbreak in DRC, which is now spread into Uganda. But he's always impatient for how Wellcome should be looking ahead. So an organization like ours, which is independent, incredibly well-funded, has to be taking risks. So he's actually essentially commissioned a fundamental review of how Wellcome funds science. So Jim Smith, who some of you will met, has actually been asked, it's now leading a 2-year review of actually how we fund science and whether the way we fund science is fit for purpose. I think that was everything I wanted to say. We can, yeah, just do questions, and I guess you're going to keep me on the spot until your next guest arrives, which is very unfair. And if I can't answer it, I'll say it's for DBT to answer.
Thanks. I come from the mental health space, so question for you is on mental health. And I know of the big initiative that Wellcome has got on mental health, and you've got a great leader now selected. Is that also going to reflect on your Wellcome DBT Alliance thing, that it will also reflect that? Or will that is largely driven by, because it's driven by DBT and all, it may not necessarily reflect Wellcome's focus on mental health?
It's a shame that Shahid is just leaving. I suspect he's going to meet the secretary. I think what I'd say is that Wellcome really doesn't interfere at all in the funding decisions or the priority areas of the Indra Alliance. And that's not a sort of avoiding a question. It really is totally down to the leadership that Shahid gives. The quality of individual applications that come to funding committees. Does anyone on a funding committee actually want to address that? I mean, you might want to comment on whether you're seeing more applications in mental health. I wonder if any of the committee members want to comment.
Yeah.
Ajit.
Yeah, Ajit Lalvan, I'm the chair of the Clinical and Public Health Committee. Firstly, I'd like to endorse what Simon Kay just said, that the Wellcome Trust doesn't interfere or influence what the committee decides to fund in any way, shape or form. And secondly, yes, we're seeing and have been seeing over several years now more and more applications in the mental health space, and including some very high quality applications indeed.
Thank you. Just before I get shoved off the stage, so I'm actually, if you don't mind, just repeat what I said at the beginning of my talk. And it's really lovely to see Dr. Renu Swarup here, the Secretary of DBT. So I'll just express again with you here now Wellcome's really heartfelt thanks and appreciation for this long-term partnership with the DBT. I can't tell you how many times Jeremy, our director, quotes the partnership. I quote it many times when we're in Africa, sort of, just trying to hint to governments that it is possible to fund on a one-to-one, even more generous basis. And I think it probably is one of the sort of the 2 or 3 top partnerships that we have anywhere in the world. So it's really appreciation from Wellcome. Thank you. Right. Thank you.